6 years ago, he called her a distraction. Tonight, she's the woman every CEO in the room wants to meet. The millionaire stands frozen beside his glamorous fiancée as the doors of the grand ballroom open. Every camera turns, every whisper dies. Because walking in, calm, radiant, untouchable, is the woman he once left behind. She doesn't look at him with hate or hurt, only quiet power. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Ward," she says, her voice steady, her smile effortless. "I must say, your event looks smaller than I imagined." The crowd gasps. The reporters pivot their lenses toward her. And for the first time in his perfect life, the man who thought he had everything feels utterly small. He invited her to humiliate her, but she came with grace, with strength, and with 2 brilliant reflections of the truth he denied. So tell me, what happens when the man who thought he had everything finally meets the woman who became everything without him? The city glittered that night, a maze of glass towers and neon light where dreams were built and hearts were easily broken. In the corner office of a 21st floor startup, Lucas Ward stood before the window, staring out at the empire he had almost built. His reflection stared back. Sharp suit, sharper ambition, and eyes that burned with the hunger of a man who wanted more. More power, more control, more respect. But behind him, in the soft light of the room, stood the woman who had made all of it possible. Monica Layton, the kind of woman who believed in him before the world even knew his name. She'd been there when the office was nothing but 2 desks and a single flickering bulb, when the dream barely kept its shape through the cracks of rejection letters and debt. She had worked beside him every night for years, managing investors, running numbers, cleaning coffee stains off half-broken desks, never once asking for anything but his time, his trust, and his love. And tonight, she carried something even greater than his success, a secret that glowed like light within her. Her hands trembled around the small white stick she'd hidden in her coat pocket. 2 pink lines, proof that life was growing inside her. Their life. She'd planned every detail, a quiet dinner, a candlelit moment, the way she would tell him that all their sacrifices had led to something pure, something eternal. She imagined his expression softening, his voice filled with wonder. She thought the man she loved would drop to his knees and thank the heavens that after years of building his dream, they were finally about to build a family. But the moment Lucas turned toward her, she knew something was wrong. His smile didn't reach his eyes. His hands didn't open for her. The man who once kissed her in the middle of chaos now looked at her as though she were the chaos itself. "Lucas," she began softly, her voice carrying warmth he no longer deserved. "I made your favorite tonight. I wanted us to celebrate—" "Monica," he interrupted. His tone was clipped, final. "We need to talk." Her heart stumbled. "Talk? About what?" He exhaled slowly, like someone delivering a practiced speech. "About us. About what this is turning into." "What this is turning into?" She forced a small laugh, trying to steady herself. "Lucas, what are you talking about? You just signed the Haven Tech deal. You did it. We did it. I did it," he said flatly. "And now I need to focus. The investors are watching everything. They expect me to project a certain image, and one of discipline, control, power, not—" He hesitated, his gaze flicking to her dress, her warmth, her hope. "Not domesticity." Her throat tightened. "Domesticity? I've been with you through everything. I stayed when people laughed at your ideas. I helped you get meetings when no one would take your calls. You can't be serious, Lucas." He turned away, his hands sliding into his pockets as though even looking at her would make him weak. "You're good, Monica, you're kind, but kindness doesn't build empires. I can't afford distractions right now." Her fingers went cold. "Distractions? Is that what I am to you?" "Don't make this harder than it is," he said. "You know how this world works. People like me, We have to be ruthless to make it. And you're still living like it's enough to just love someone. It's not. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Lucas, I'm not asking for anything. Just time. We'll figure this out together. You don't have to end it. I do, he said simply. Because this isn't working anymore. You were right for the beginning, but not for where I'm going. The words struck harder than a slap. Right for the beginning, not for where I'm going. Monica took a step back. And where exactly are you going, Lucas? Somewhere love doesn't exist? He met her gaze with a coldness that made her tremble. Love doesn't close deals. Ambition does. You'll understand someday. Her voice cracked. And what about me? What about us? He hesitated, just long enough for her to believe there was still a piece of the man she loved somewhere inside him. But when he spoke, that illusion shattered. There is no us, Monica. You were part of the journey. But this is where our roads divide. The silence that followed was suffocating. She felt the air leave her lungs as if the world itself had decided she didn't belong in it anymore. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, one last desperate attempt to hold on to something real. But he pulled away. I'm sorry, he said, though there was no apology in his tone. I can't afford to be sentimental right now. She looked around the office that smelled of ink and dreams. The same one where they'd once stayed up all night laughing, planning, hoping. Every memory turned to ash in her mind. In that moment, Monica realized something no one had ever taught her before. Sometimes the people who promise you forever only mean until it's inconvenient. Her vision blurred, her heart pounded. But she wouldn't beg, not for him, not anymore. She reached into her coat and placed the small box on his desk. Inside it were two things: a silver tie clip she'd bought for him when he landed his first investor, and the positive pregnancy test. Lucas's eyes flickered down, confused, and then up at her again. Unreadable. Unmoved. She whispered, "Congratulations, Lucas. You're going to be a father." For a heartbeat, he froze. Then his jaw hardened. "That's impossible," he said. "And even if it isn't, I'm not ready for that. You know what a child would do to my image right now." Monica took a trembling breath, holding back the scream rising in her chest. "Your image? Lucas, this is our child." "Not mine," he said quietly, turning away. "And even if it were, I can't deal with that right now. I have a company to run." That was the moment something inside her died. She had loved him through hunger, through humiliation, through doubt. But nothing prepared her for the emptiness of watching the man she once called her future turn into a stranger made of ice and pride. There was nothing left to say. Monica walked toward the door, each step heavier than the last. The city outside pulsed with the noise of cars, laughter, life. But all she could hear was the sound of her heart breaking in silence. At the doorway, she turned one last time, taking in the man who had once been her everything, now reduced to a lesson she would never forget. Her voice was soft but steady when she spoke. "I hope your success keeps you warm, Lucas, because when love leaves, the lights don't make the cold any softer." And then she left, pregnant, heartbroken, and stripped of everything except her determination to rise. That night, as rain began to fall over the glittering city, Monica sat alone in her small apartment, one hand resting on her still flat stomach. Tears streamed down her face, but her eyes, those bright, defiant eyes, no longer held despair. Only resolve. She whispered to her unborn child, her voice trembling but full of promise. "You'll never need him to know your worth." The winter wind howled outside the small apartment, rattling the cracked window panes as Monica Layton paced the floor, one hand gripping her belly, the other clutching her phone. She was alone. Again. Labor had started earlier than expected, a sharp, relentless pain that came in waves. No one was there to hold her hand, to whisper that everything would be okay. The man who should have been waiting anxiously outside a hospital room was probably giving another press interview about how sacrifice built success. But tonight, the only sacrifice being made was hers. Hours later, in a modest hospital ward filled with the cries of other newborns and the soft hum of machines, Monica gave birth to two miracles, a boy and a girl, Caleb and Karina, tiny, fragile, but alive. When the nurse placed them in her arms, she wept. Not because of exhaustion, but because in that moment she realized something profound. Even though Lucas had broken her, life had given her something unbreakable in return. Her children didn't just fill the void, they became her reason to rise. The first months were a blur of sleepless nights, unpaid bills, and endless uncertainty. The electricity was cut twice. Her fridge broke down once and she couldn't afford to fix it for weeks. She learned to survive on oatmeal, coffee, and hope. When both babies fell sick at 3 months old, she sold her last piece of jewelry, a silver bracelet Lucas had given her during their first Christmas, to pay the medical bills. There were nights she cried until morning, whispering apologies to her sleeping babies. "I'm trying," she'd say through trembling lips. "I swear I'm trying." But she refused to collapse. While the world saw a struggling single mother, Monica was quietly transforming into something extraordinary. A woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore, everything to gain. When Caleb turned 1, Monica took a job cleaning offices downtown. At night, after tucking the twins into bed, she worked on her laptop, designing logos, writing proposals, taking small freelance projects for local nonprofits. She had no fancy degree, no investors, no reputation. Just grit. Every rejection email cut deep, but she kept going. Because when you're fighting for your children, failure stops being an option. Her favorite time of day was just before dawn, when the city was still asleep and the twins' gentle breathing filled the room. She'd sip cheap coffee and whisper to herself, "One day this will all mean something. One day I'll build something beautiful from the ashes." Her breakthrough came by chance, or maybe destiny. One afternoon, while cleaning the reception area of a small community center, she overheard a frantic conversation between two staff members. A charity director had just lost their event planner days before a major fundraising gala. Sponsors were threatening to pull out. Without thinking, Monica approached. "Excuse me," she said, still in her cleaning uniform. "I have some experience with logistics and organization. I could help, just for the event." They exchanged uncertain glances, but desperation left no room for pride. By that weekend, Monica was knee-deep in chaos, spreadsheets, decorations, volunteer coordination, catering issues. But as the days passed, she began to shine. Her attention to detail, her calm under pressure, her ability to inspire others, they noticed. The night of the gala, everything went flawlessly. Guests raved about how seamless it felt. The director, Mrs. Karina Harper, approached her afterward, astonished. "You organize this like someone who's been doing it for years. Where did you learn all this?" Monica smiled, exhaustion softening her features. "When life keeps falling apart, you learn how to keep things together." Mrs. Harper handed her a business card. "Call me Monday. I think you have a future here." It was the first door that had opened in years, and Monica walked through it with trembling hands and a burning heart. Within 6 months, she was working full-time at the community center. Her natural leadership and empathy turned her into the quiet backbone of every successful event. People admired how she made even the smallest project feel meaningful. It wasn't long before donors began asking specifically for her by name. "Get Monica," they'd say. "She makes magic happen." Her children, still too young to understand the depth of her sacrifices, grew up watching their mother juggle work, studies, and bedtime stories with unwavering grace. She used to tell them every night, "You can start with nothing and still build everything." Caleb would giggle, Everything like Lego blocks? Yes, she'd whisper, kissing his forehead. But these ones are made of dreams. Years passed, and Monica's dedication began to attract attention beyond the local level. She took online business courses, learned accounting, and studied social impact models while her twins napped. By the time she turned 30, she had launched the Leighton Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to helping single mothers access education, employment, and childcare. It started with 5 volunteers and 1 donated office space. Within 2 years, it became a nationally recognized organization. Monica became known not just as a woman who survived heartbreak, but as a visionary leader who turned pain into purpose. Journalists called her the woman who rose without permission. But success didn't come without struggle. There were moments she wanted to quit, like the night a storm flooded her small office, destroying months of paperwork. Or when donors pulled out because she refused to compromise her ethics. Still, she never broke. She remembered Lucas's words, "You were right for the beginning, but not for where I'm going." And every time she heard them echo in her memory, she smiled now, because she finally understood. He was right. She wasn't meant for his journey. She was meant to build her own. One evening, as the twins colored beside her desk, Monica received an email from the National Business Council. Her foundation had been nominated for a Humanitarian Leadership Award. She stared at the screen, hands trembling, not from disbelief, but from the quiet acknowledgement that every sleepless night, every tear, every sacrifice had led here. Caleb looked up from his crayons. "Mom, why are you smiling like that?" Monica blinked back tears. "Because, sweetheart, sometimes the world finally notices the people it once overlooked." Outside her window, the city lights glittered again. The same skyline where she once fell apart, now reflecting the glow of everything she'd rebuilt. And as she leaned back in her chair, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I was meant to lose him, so I could find me." The cameras loved him. Every time Lucas stepped into a boardroom, reporters' flashes followed like a ritual. 6 years after Monica walked away from his life, his name had become synonymous with success. Ward Global, the same company they once built together from nothing but borrowed coffee and sleepless nights, was now a $1 million empire, splashed across the covers of business magazines and financial networks. The press called him a self-made visionary, but Monica knew better. And somewhere deep inside, so did Lucas. That morning, Lucas sat in his glass-walled office overlooking the city skyline, sunlight gleaming off the tower that bore his name. His reflection stared back at him from the window. Immaculate suit, perfect tie, a man who had everything, or so it appeared. On his desk lay the plans for the company's 10th anniversary gala, an event meant to outshine every other celebration of the decade. The list of attendees was a roll call of power: celebrities, senators, tech giants, and the kind of investors who moved markets with a single word. And yet, as his assistant rattled off the RSVPs, Lucas barely listened. His thoughts were elsewhere, drifting toward the one person who hadn't seen his glory: Monica. The name still lingered in some unused corner of his mind, like a song he pretended to forget but couldn't quite silence. She had been there in the beginning, helping him draft proposals on a second-hand laptop, bringing him food when he worked through the night, believing in him when no one else would. Back then, she'd been the voice of calm through every storm, the anchor to his restless ambition. Until ambition convinced him she was the storm. He'd told her she was too sentimental, that she didn't belong in the circles he was destined for. That love was a distraction. He'd watched her leave without chasing her, convinced that someday when success crowned him, she would realize what she'd lost. But 6 years of wealth hadn't given him peace, only noise. "Sir?" his assistant interrupted gently, holding a clipboard. "We've confirmed Governor Ryan, the Forbes delegation, and the international press for the anniversary gala. The sponsors have doubled their coverage, It's going to be the biggest event of the year. Lucas nodded absently, still staring at the guest list. Make sure Patricia has everything she needs for her press appearance. Of course. Patricia Hale, his fiancée, was the perfect accessory to his image. Elegant, poised, and from a family old enough to own half the city's heritage buildings. Their relationship was a merger of convenience wrapped in chemistry, a public alliance of influence. She understood status, she understood appearances, but she would never understand him, not the way Monica once had. The afternoon meeting stretched on endlessly. Branding consultants, sponsorship executives, event designers presenting holographic mock-ups of the ballroom. But amid the clamor of planning perfection, a thought crept in, uninvited yet persistent. She's never seen this. Not any of it. He told himself it didn't matter, that he'd moved on, that he didn't owe her a single thought, but pride is a dangerous drug. And Lucas had been overdosing on it for years. So when his assistant returned with the final draft of the invitation list, he glanced through it, pen tapping against the glossy paper. Then, almost without thinking, he said the words that would set everything in motion. Add one more name. The assistant blinked. Who, sir? He hesitated for a moment, then smiled, slow and deliberate. Monica Layton. The assistant froze. Monica, as in, yes. His tone was clipped, final. Send her the full invitation package, the embossed stationery, the silk envelope, everything. The assistant hesitated. Do you want to include a message? Lucas leaned back in his chair, a cruel satisfaction curling in his chest. Yes. Write this. I thought you'd appreciate seeing what your hard work helped build. It's quite an educational experience to see what success looks like when it's done right. That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Lucas joined Patricia for a televised interview at the Four Seasons. Cameras lined the red carpet as journalists shouted questions. Lucas, how does it feel to reach 10 years of unstoppable growth? He smiled for the flashbulbs. It's proof that focus and discipline are stronger than emotion. The crowd applauded, and Patricia's fingers slipped possessively through his arm. You've always known what you wanted, she purred into the microphone. Lucas nodded. And I've never looked back. But later, in the quiet of the limousine, her perfume lingering in the air, he did look back, mentally at least. The last time he'd seen Monica's face, the tremble in her voice when she said, I believed in you more than anyone. It wasn't love he missed. It was something harder to name. Perhaps the reflection of who he used to be before ambition hollowed him out. The next morning, the courier left a package at Monica's office door. Lucas wasn't there to see it, but he could picture it. The way her brow would furrow at the gold-embossed logo, the flicker of surprise before realization. He imagined her reaction not with empathy, but with satisfaction. He wanted her to remember what she'd lost, to see the man she could have stood beside if only she'd been enough. Patricia noticed his faint smirk at breakfast. What's got you so pleased? She asked, sipping champagne. Just thinking about unfinished business, he said smoothly. Old investors? Something like that. Patricia smiled, oblivious. Whatever it is, I hope they see what they missed out on. Oh, Lucas murmured, staring into his glass. They will. The weeks leading to the gala were filled with noise. Interviews, rehearsals, headlines hailing him as the modern Midas. But beneath the applause, a strange unease grew. Every accolade, every compliment felt hollow, like applause echoing through an empty theater. He couldn't explain it, and he didn't try to. Because arrogance doesn't recognize loneliness. It mistakes it for victory. On the eve of the gala, Lucas stood alone in the ballroom of the Grand Belmont, overseeing the final preparations. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above him. The marble floors gleamed. Musicians tuned violins in the corner, and waiters rehearsed champagne service with military precision. He should have felt triumphant, Instead, he felt restless. He traced the logo on the wall, the same one Monica had designed 10 years ago, her handwriting forming the company's emblem. He'd never changed it. Investors had said it was iconic. He told himself it was branding genius. But deep down, he'd kept it because he couldn't erase the only good thing she ever gave him, the one mark she left that outlasted everything. As the lights dimmed and the crew rehearsed the press coverage, Lucas caught his reflection once again in the mirrored wall. His expression hardened. His voice dropped to a murmur meant only for himself arrogantly, "Let her see what she missed." And with that, the man who once claimed he'd never look back sealed his own fate, because pride has a way of setting the stage for its own undoing. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Monica's office, lighting the rows of framed photographs that told the story of her journey. Community projects, charity galas, smiling mothers who'd rebuilt their lives through the Leighton Foundation. The soft hum of city life echoed below, but Monica barely noticed. Her mind was deep in planning mode. She was finalizing a scholarship program that would send 20 underprivileged children to school that year. Her assistant, a bright young woman named Jenna, entered with a neatly wrapped parcel in her hands. "This just came for you," Jenna said, a curious look in her eyes. It was hand-delivered. The courier was wearing a tuxedo. "I thought it must be important." Monica glanced up briefly, offering a distracted smile. "Probably an event sponsor. Set it on the desk. I'll open it later." But the envelope demanded attention. It wasn't ordinary. Thick ivory paper edged with gold foil, sealed with a wax insignia she knew all too well. Ward Global. Her pulse stilled. For the first time in years, a name she'd trained herself not to think about, not to speak aloud, slipped back into her mind. Lucas. She stared at the envelope for a long time before she finally broke the seal. Inside lay an elegant invitation embossed in black and gold, the 10th anniversary of Ward Global. The company she had once built beside him, the empire she had helped lay brick by brick, only to be erased from its history when she became inconvenient to his story of self-made success. Her eyes moved to the signature at the bottom. Lucas Ward. And beneath it, handwritten in his unmistakable scrawl, were the words, "It should be quite an educational experience for you." For a moment, the world tilted, the old ache returning like a ghost she thought she'd buried long ago. The memory of that night came flooding back, her trembling voice asking for love, his cold expression when he told her she was holding him back, the way he'd dismissed her as if her devotion had been an obstacle, not a gift. She had cried for days after he left, but she hadn't cried since, and she wasn't about to start now. Monica laid the invitation flat on the desk, her reflection glinting faintly in the gold trim. The woman in that reflection wasn't the same girl who'd once begged a man to see her worth. That woman had been soft, afraid, desperate to be enough. The woman staring back now was steady, calm, and quietly formidable. She was the founder of a global foundation that changed lives across continents. She was a mother who'd raised 2 extraordinary children on her own. She was living proof that love, once broken, could be rebuilt into power. Lucas thought this invitation would humiliate her, that she'd feel small next to his wealth, his status, his spotlight. He didn't know he was inviting a woman who had learned to build her own light. When the initial shock faded, Monica felt something else rising in its place. Not anger, not sorrow, but something fiercer. Resolve. She picked up her phone and dialed a familiar number. "Elena, lunch at noon? I need your opinion on something dramatic." An hour later, Monica and her best friend sat at their favorite cafe downtown. The invitation lay between them on the table like a challenge waiting to be accepted. Elena's eyebrows shot up as she read the handwritten note. Unbelievable. 6 years of silence, and this is how he reaches out? To gloat? Monica's lips curved in a small, almost amused smile. To remind me, more like it. To show me what I supposedly lost. Elena shook her head. And you're not going to give him the satisfaction, right? You're going to tear it up and forget it. Monica stirred her tea thoughtfully. No. Elena blinked. No? Monica looked up, her gaze calm and unwavering. I'm going. Monica, I'm not going for him, she interrupted softly. I'm going for me, for my children, so they can see what strength looks like, so they'll understand that you don't hide from your past. You outgrow it. Elena stared at her for a long time, then sighed, a slow smile spreading across her face. You're really going to walk into that lion's den with your head held high, aren't you? Not just walk, Monica said quietly. I'm going to own the room. That night, she sat at the dining table with Caleb and Karina, now 6 years old, bright, precocious, and impossibly wise for their age. Caleb was sketching rockets on a napkin, while Karina practiced writing her name in perfect cursive. Monica watched them with pride swelling in her chest. Mom, Karina said suddenly, why are you smiling like that? Monica laughed softly. Because you two make me proud every single day. Caleb looked up, his gray eyes, so much like Lucas's, yet warmer, filled with curiosity. Did something good happen? Monica hesitated for a moment, then decided honesty was better than protection. I got an invitation today, from someone I used to know a long time ago. He's hosting a big party. He wants us to come. Karina gasped. A party? Like with lights and cake and music? Monica smiled. Something like that, yes. But this one isn't just for fun. It's important. Important how? Caleb asked. Because, Monica said, leaning forward, her voice soft but steady, sometimes life gives you moments where you get to show the world, and yourself, how far you've come. Caleb nodded slowly, understanding far more than a child should. So, we're going to show them? She smiled. Exactly. Later that night, as the twins slept, Monica returned to her desk. The city lights shimmered outside her window, 1,000 reflections of possibility. She opened her planner, turned to a blank page, and wrote across the top in bold letters, Operation Grace. Beneath it, she listed her goals. 1. Attend the gala. 2. Show professionalism, elegance, and strength. 3. Let the twins see dignity in action. 4. Leave no trace of bitterness, only excellence. When she was finished, she sat back and looked at the words. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about proving Lucas wrong. It was about proving that she'd already won. Simply by standing tall in the life she'd built without him. Her pain had become purpose. Her loss had become legacy. The next morning, Monica met with her foundation's team. Her schedule was full. Meetings, press calls, a live interview about their international expansion. But beneath her calm, efficient professionalism, a quiet fire burned. She didn't feel fear. She felt anticipation. The invitation that was meant to wound her had become her call to action. By the time the gala came, Lucas wouldn't be facing the woman he left behind. He'd be facing the woman he never believed she could become. She placed the invitation back in its envelope, sealing it carefully. Then she whispered, not to Lucas, but to the universe that had watched her fall and rise again. He thinks he's inviting the woman he left behind. He's about to meet the woman I became. The moment Monica decided to attend the gala, the air around her seemed to change. Her resolve, once quiet and internal, became something tangible, a pulse of focus that carried her through every waking hour. For 6 years, she had built her life piece by piece, turning heartbreak into purpose, rejection into empire. Now she was preparing not for confrontation, but for closure. Not to prove her worth to Lucas, but to show her children that grace is the sharpest kind of power. And so, Operation Grace began. The first step was preparation. Not in anger, but in elegance. That Saturday morning, sunlight streamed through the soft curtains of her riverside home. The twins, Caleb and Karina, were at the breakfast table whispering conspiratorially as Monica reviewed fabric samples laid across the counter. She wasn't looking for extravagance. She wanted symbolism, strength disguised as simplicity. Her tailor, a quiet genius named Adrian, held up 2 gowns, one sapphire, one emerald. "Which feels like you?" he asked gently. Monica ran her fingers along the emerald silk, deep, rich, regal. It shimmered subtly, catching light without begging for it. She smiled faintly. "This one, it's calm, but it doesn't apologize for being noticed." Adrian nodded in approval. A queen's choice. Over the next week, fittings became rituals of rebirth. Each stitch felt like a reclaiming of the narrative Lucas had once stolen. Every adjustment reminded her she wasn't stepping into his world, she was arriving from her own. One evening, as Monica zipped Karina's new gown and adjusted Caleb's tiny tuxedo, both children looked at her with wide eyes filled with curiosity and unspoken questions. "Mom," Karina asked softly, "you said we're going to a special event. Who's going to be there?" Monica met her daughter's gaze in the mirror, choosing her words with care. "Someone you've asked about before," she said gently. "Your father." The twins froze. Caleb blinked. "The man in your old photo box?" "Yes," Monica whispered. "That man." The silence that followed felt sacred, almost fragile. Karina frowned. "Why are we only meeting him now?" Monica knelt beside them, her hands resting gently on their shoulders. "Because sometimes," she said softly, "people make choices that take them away from what truly matters, and no matter how much love we have to give, we can't make someone ready to receive it." "Does that mean he didn't want us?" Caleb's voice was barely a whisper. Her heart squeezed, but her face stayed calm, radiant in its strength. "It means he didn't understand what he was losing," she said. "But that's not our burden. You don't need him to know your worth. You already have it." The twins nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in like sunlight through water. Then Karina asked, "So, why are we going?" Monica smiled gently. "To show the world how grace looks when it refuses to break." Later that week, Monica scheduled what her assistant believed was a site visit for an upcoming foundation fundraiser. In truth, it was reconnaissance. She arrived at the Grand Belmont Hotel in a tailored white suit, clipboard in hand, radiating effortless professionalism. No one suspected that she was studying the terrain for an entirely different purpose. Rebecca, the event coordinator, greeted her warmly. "It's always a pleasure, Monica. You'll love what we've done with the ballroom. We're hosting a major corporate celebration this weekend, one of the biggest of the year." "I've heard," Monica replied lightly, her tone perfectly neutral. Rebecca led her through the opulent halls. The chandeliers gleamed like frozen rain. The grand staircase curved downward in a dramatic sweep, the kind of entrance built for cameras. "The lighting will cascade down the staircase during guest arrivals," Rebecca explained. "We've also added floral arrangements along the banister. It's designed to draw attention." Monica studied every detail: the sightlines, the camera positions, the timing of the lighting sequence. Every inch of the space became part of her strategy. She wasn't planning a scene. She was preparing a statement. When they reached the ballroom, Monica paused near the center. "Tell me," she asked casually, "who's the guest of honor for this event?" Rebecca smiled. "Ward Global. Their CEO, Lucas Ward." The name should have stung. It didn't. Monica's lips curved in a small, measured smile. "Of course, I'll make sure my team sends over congratulations." As she left the venue, her heels clicking softly against the marble floor, she felt something settle in her chest. Peace, steady and unshakable. This was no longer about the man who'd left her behind. This was about the woman who had outgrown him entirely. That night, the house hummed with quiet excitement. Adrian dropped off the final gown, perfectly tailored. The twins practiced their manners, posture straight, smiles polite, hands folded when spoken to. Caleb, ever the observant one, looked up at his mother as she pinned a silver brooch to her shawl. "Mom," he said, "why do we need to be so perfect?" She smiled. "Because we're not going to remind anyone of what they lost. We're going to remind them of what they'll never deserve again." Karina giggled softly, twirling in her tiny green dress. "So we're showing him what real class looks like?" "Exactly," Monica said, smoothing her daughter's curls. "But remember, grace doesn't shout, it shines." As bedtime approached, the twins lingered in the doorway of her room. The emerald gown hung against the mirror, gleaming like a promise. Caleb hesitated, then asked the question she'd known was coming. "Mom, when we see him, will he know we're his?" Monica turned toward them slowly, her heart both heavy and light. She reached for their hands, her smile calm, almost luminous. "Oh, he'll know," she said softly. "He'll know the moment he sees you, in your eyes, your kindness, your brilliance." Karina tilted her head. "Will everyone else know too?" Monica's smile deepened, a quiet power radiating from her voice. "Everyone will." Later that night, when the house was silent, Monica stood before the mirror in her emerald gown, hair cascading like dark silk over her shoulders. The woman staring back was no longer the girl Lucas left behind in a rain-soaked apartment. This woman had built an empire, raised a family, and reclaimed every piece of herself that had once been broken. She whispered to her reflection, not as a vow, but as truth. "You don't rise to prove anyone wrong. You rise because you finally remember who you are." The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, a sea of possibility reflecting her transformation. Operation Grace was complete. The woman who had been forgotten was ready to be unforgettable. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in golden light and anticipation. From the top floor of the Grand Belmont Hotel, you could see the entire city glittering, a constellation of ambition. The ballroom below pulsed with soft jazz, crystal chandeliers, and murmurs of wealth. Reporters lined the red carpet, cameras flashing as limousines rolled in one after another, spilling out the elite and the envied. It was the kind of night Lucas lived for. He stood near the entrance of the ballroom, polished to perfection. Black tuxedo, silk bow tie, confidence oozing from every measured gesture. At his side was Patricia, elegant in a silver gown, her diamond earrings catching the camera lights like stars. "Smile, darling," she whispered, squeezing his hand as reporters called their names. He smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was victory. Tonight wasn't just about celebrating a company. It was about proving to the world, and to himself, that he had won. That he had chosen power over sentiment, ambition over love, greatness over what he once called weakness. The ballroom was a cathedral of luxury. Gold drapes framed marble pillars, tables glittered with champagne glasses, and a jazz quartet played near the stage where the press backdrop read, "Ward Global, 10 years of vision." Everywhere Lucas turned, people congratulated him. "You've built an empire. You're the man who never misses. You define success." He soaked it in, every word feeding the ego that had been starving for validation. But beneath the surface, something restless stirred, a faint unease he couldn't name. At exactly 8:43 p.m., a hush rippled through the crowd. It began at the far end of the ballroom near the grand staircase, a subtle shift in attention, then whispers spreading like wind through silk. Heads turned, cameras pivoted. The air itself seemed to change temperature. Lucas followed the movement instinctively, irritation flashing across his face, until he saw her. Monica. She stood at the top of the staircase, bathed in soft golden light. Her emerald gown flowed like liquid grace, catching every glimmer from the chandeliers above. Her dark hair framed her face in loose waves, and her eyes, calm, steady, and impossibly knowing, scanned the room with quiet composure. At her side stood two children, Caleb and Karina, dressed in miniature tuxedo and gown. Their small hands clasped hers. Their presence alone was enough to silence the music, to make every guest hold their breath. And it wasn't just their beauty that drew attention. It was something hauntingly familiar. The unmistakable reflection of Lucas in their gray eyes. The resemblance was undeniable. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The journalists who had been waiting for celebrity arrivals forgot their scripts. Camera flashes erupted like lightning. The crowd parted instinctively as Monica descended, her every step deliberate, poised, unhurried. She didn't glance at the cameras. She didn't need to. The world had already decided where its gaze would stay. Patricia stiffened beside Lucas, her manicured fingers tightening around his arm. "Who are they?" she whispered, though the answer was already dawning in her tone. Lucas couldn't speak. His throat felt dry. His mind flooded with 1,000 memories. The long nights working side by side, the smell of coffee in their tiny apartment, the woman who once believed in him more than he believed in himself. He had invited her to be a footnote in his story. Instead, she had walked in as the headline. As Monica reached the final step, her gaze found his. She didn't look angry. She didn't look wounded. She looked free. There was power in her stillness, the kind that doesn't need to shout to command a room. Caleb tugged her hand gently. "Mom, everyone's staring." "I know," she whispered with a small smile. "Let them." The host, recognizing her from countless news features about the Leighton Foundation, hurried forward. "Ms. Monica, we're honored by your presence. You've done such remarkable work with your organization." "Thank you," she replied warmly, her voice clear enough for nearby reporters to catch. "It's a privilege to witness the achievements of others tonight." Her words were gracious, yet every syllable landed with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to be introduced. Flashbulbs burst in her direction. "Monica, over here!" "Ms. Monica, one photo, please." "Is that your family?" She smiled, guiding the twins gently toward the crowd. "My children," she said proudly, "Caleb and Karina." The reporters gasped. The resemblance to Lucas was impossible to ignore now. The same eyes, the same proud posture. Patricia's smile faltered. Her grip on Lucas's arm went rigid. Lucas forced a laugh that didn't sound like him. "Excuse me a moment," he muttered. But before he could retreat, Monica stepped closer. For the first time in 6 years, they stood face to face. The last time had been in a cramped apartment, rain on the window, pain thick in the air. Now it was beneath chandeliers with cameras flashing and the world watching. She inclined her head slightly, the faintest hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Thank you for the invitation, Mr. Ward," she said, her tone light but edged with quiet amusement. "I must say, your event looks smaller than I imagined." A ripple of laughter moved through the surrounding guests, polite but unmistakably aware of the undercurrent. Lucas's jaw tightened. "You came," he managed. "I always keep my promises," she said. "Even the ones you never thought I could keep." He didn't know what to say. Everything about her, her poise, her confidence, her effortless grace, undid the image he'd built of her as fragile and forgotten. He glanced at the children again, a flicker of disbelief breaking through his composure. "Are they—" Monica caught the question in his eyes and smiled faintly, a private understanding passing between them. She didn't need to answer. The truth was written in their faces, in every mirrored detail of him standing there in miniature. And as the cameras clicked furiously, Lucas realized that the moment he had planned to humiliate her had become the moment that defined him. Not as a winner, but as a man who had thrown away his only real chance at greatness. Patricia leaned close, her whisper sharp. "You didn't tell me she'd be here." Lucas's voice was low, stunned. Neither did she. Across the room, Monica greeted investors, philanthropists, and politicians, people who once orbited Lucas, but now turned toward her as if drawn by quiet gravity. She didn't flaunt her success. She simply was it. And the more she smiled, the smaller Lucas felt. As the night unfolded, whispers filled the room like electricity. That's the woman he left? She's extraordinary. The twins, they look just like him. Every whisper was a mirror, forcing Lucas to see himself through their eyes, and the reflection wasn't flattering. He'd once told her she wasn't fit for his world. Now it was clear. She had built a world grander than his. The orchestra shifted to a softer melody, and Monica turned gracefully toward the twins. "Shall we find our seats?" Caleb nodded solemnly. Karina beamed. As they walked away, the crowd parted again, not out of curiosity this time, but respect. Lucas stood frozen, his fiancée's hand trembling in his, surrounded by applause that wasn't for him. The night moved forward like a tide, each wave of conversation, laughter, and champagne glittering under the chandeliers. But the current had changed. When Monica walked in, the air had shifted. When she began to speak, it transformed entirely. She wasn't just an arrival now. She was the center of gravity. Lucas stood near the podium at the head of the ballroom, surrounded by the same investors who used to hang on his every word. Yet for the first time, their attention wasn't fixed on him. Their eyes kept drifting toward the woman in emerald, her children beside her like twin reflections of grace and legacy. Senators shook her hand. CEOs leaned in to listen when she spoke. Reporters abandoned their schedules just to capture her laugh, her ease, her calm confidence. Where Lucas saw a rival, the world saw a revelation. When Monica moved through the crowd, she did so effortlessly. Her smile was soft but knowing, her tone warm but commanding. She didn't rush, she didn't reach. She was the kind of presence that didn't ask for space. It created it. A senator she'd partnered with for a national education bill approached, beaming. "Monica, what a pleasant surprise. The Foundation's scholarship program has been life-changing. My wife still talks about the gala you organized in D.C. Monica inclined her head modestly. "It was teamwork, Senator. You gave us the platform. We just made sure the right voices were heard." The senator chuckled. "Still humble, I see. That's why people trust you." Nearby, a media executive leaned over to her colleague. "That's the Monica? From the Leighton Foundation, she's a force. No wonder the press adores her." Whispers spread like wildfire through the ballroom, quiet, reverent, impossible to ignore. At the center table, Patricia smiled tightly, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she swirled her wine. "She certainly knows how to make an entrance," she murmured to Lucas, her tone poised but edged. Lucas forced a smirk. "She always liked attention." Patricia's gaze lingered on Monica a moment longer. "No," she said slowly. "This doesn't look like attention. It looks like respect." Her words hit harder than he expected. When the evening reached its midpoint, the host stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the visionary behind Ward Global, the man whose leadership has defined the last decade, Mr. Lucas Ward." Applause echoed politely across the ballroom, but not thunderously. Cameras turned toward the stage, and for the first time that night, Lucas felt the spotlight sting rather than soothe. He adjusted his cufflinks, squared his shoulders, and began his speech. 10 years ago, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. This company began as a dream, one fueled by hard work, perseverance, and an unshakable belief that anything is possible. A few polite nods. He continued. We've grown from humble beginnings to an international enterprise. But success, ladies and gentlemen, isn't just about innovation or vision. It's about inspiration. It's about the people who push you to be better. He paused deliberately, letting the cameras find him, expecting to see admiration reflected back. Instead, he saw Monica, Seated elegantly near the center of the room, she wasn't staring up at him in awe. She was listening with the same serene composure of someone watching a rerun of a story they'd already outgrown. Lucas hesitated, his practiced rhythm faltering for a beat. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. I've always said, the greatest success is turning your setbacks into stepping stones. And sometimes, the people who challenge us the most inspire our best work. It was meant as subtle condescension, a veiled message to her. But it backfired instantly. Because when the crowd began to applaud, they weren't looking at him. They were looking at her. A senator whispered, "He's talking about her, isn't he?" A reporter nodded. "Of course he is. Everyone knows she helped him start it." The applause grew, warm and genuine, but directed entirely toward the woman in emerald. Monica didn't stand or draw attention. She simply smiled, a gesture of calm acknowledgement. She had no need to claim credit. The truth was already doing it for her. Lucas continued, his voice straining for control. Ward Global wouldn't exist without the support of its incredible partners and the community that believes in our mission. Patricia leaned forward slightly, catching the growing whispers around her. She glanced across the table and froze. Two executives were deep in conversation. Her foundation's reach is global now, one said. Education, healthcare, social programs. She's doing what his company only talks about. She's more influential than him, the other replied simply. Patricia's fingers tightened around her glass. Monica turned to her children, who were watching with quiet curiosity. Caleb whispered, "Mom, why is everyone clapping for you when he's the one talking?" She smiled softly. Because truth always finds its voice, even when others try to speak over it. Karina tilted her head. Does that mean he knows now? Monica looked toward the stage. He's starting to. When Lucas finished, the applause was polite but brief. Then the host returned, beaming. Thank you, Mr. Ward. And before we close, I'd like to recognize someone truly remarkable in this room tonight. A woman whose leadership, compassion, and resilience continue to inspire us all. Ms. Monica. The crowd erupted, this time genuinely. Flashbulbs fired again. The orchestra struck a soft chord as guests stood to applaud. Lucas froze. This wasn't in the program. Monica rose gracefully, her expression poised. Thank you, she said, her voice carrying like silk through the microphone as the host handed it to her. I didn't expect this. You deserve it, the host said warmly. You've shown the world what vision really looks like. She took a breath, then spoke. When I first started my foundation, she said, I believed success was about proving yourself to others. But I've learned that true success isn't about validation. It's about contribution. It's about building something that still stands even when the world doubts you, especially when it doubts you. The room went still. Every eye was on her. She glanced briefly at Lucas. Sometimes life removes people from your story not because they're unimportant, but because their chapter has ended. And that's okay. Every ending is an invitation to begin again, stronger, wiser, freer. The applause that followed shook the chandeliers. Even Patricia, against her will, clapped slowly, because in that moment, everyone in the room understood. The story didn't belong to Lucas anymore. It belonged to Monica. Lucas sat back in his chair, the noise of the applause fading into a hollow echo inside his chest. This was supposed to be his night, his legacy, his proof of triumph. But every face he looked at reflected the same realization. She's the success story now. And as he looked toward the stage where Monica stood illuminated by soft golden light, he felt something he hadn't in years. Not anger, not envy, loss. Because he finally understood. He hadn't lost a woman. He had lost his better self. Across the room, Patricia leaned toward an investor, trying to salvage composure. Quite the speech, she murmured. The investor smiled faintly. Yes, but she didn't need a speech. The room already belonged to her. Then he added almost casually, "She's more influential than him." Patricia froze. The words hung in the air like a prophecy fulfilled. The ballroom had quieted into the soft hum of late-night elegance. Laughter fading, glasses emptying, and chandeliers dimming into a warm, golden afterglow. The gala was nearly over, yet for Lucas, the night refused to end. He had stood through the final applause like a statue, every muscle locked in place, a polite smile frozen on his lips while his mind burned. Around him, guests congratulated Monica, shook her hand, and exchanged cards. They weren't merely impressed. They were drawn to her, orbiting her like light around gravity. His company's 10th anniversary, his night of triumph, had turned into her coronation. And still, she hadn't gloated once. That was what unsettled him most. She hadn't needed to. Her silence had done what revenge never could. It had exposed him. He found her later, standing on the open balcony overlooking the glittering city. The music inside had faded into faint piano notes, and the cool night breeze tugged gently at the silk of her emerald gown. For a moment, Lucas hesitated in the doorway, watching her from a distance. She looked untouchable, not because she'd built walls, but because she'd built wings. Her hair shimmered softly under the city lights, and her reflection gleamed faintly in the glass doors beside her. The same woman he had once called a distraction now looked like everything he'd spent his life chasing: poise, purpose, and peace. He stepped closer, his voice low, heavy. "You planned this." She didn't turn immediately. Her gaze remained on the skyline. "No," she said quietly. "I planned my life." Her calmness stung worse than anger ever could. Lucas laughed bitterly, though there was no real humor left in him. "You expect me to believe this wasn't intentional? The timing, the dress, the press, even the children." She turned then, meeting his eyes with quiet steadiness. "The children?" she repeated softly. Lucas swallowed hard. His gaze drifted past her to the ballroom inside, where Caleb and Karina stood near the dessert table, chatting politely with 2 reporters. Their laughter was light, their manner disarmingly confident for 6-year-olds. "They look like me," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Her expression didn't falter. "No," she said gently. "They are like me, strong, kind, and free from needing anyone's permission to exist." Her words were soft, but each one struck with the precision of truth. Lucas took a step closer. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you wouldn't have listened," Monica replied. "You were too busy chasing things that glittered to notice what was real. You called me a distraction, remember? I just made sure I stopped being one." He exhaled sharply, guilt prickling through his composure like cracks in glass. "You made me out to be the villain tonight." She shook her head. "No, Lucas. You did that yourself. I didn't have to make you look small. You did that the moment you decided kindness was weakness." The wind stirred between them, carrying the faint echoes of the music still playing inside. A slow, melancholy waltz that sounded almost like a memory. Monica continued, her tone steady but not cruel. "You built an empire on pride. I built a life on purpose. And maybe that's the real difference between us. You wanted people to see your power. I just wanted my children to see what strength looks like when it doesn't destroy." Lucas's jaw tightened, his voice raw. "I gave you everything I had." Monica's eyes softened. "No, Lucas. You gave me limits, and I outgrew them." He looked away, gripping the railing, his reflection fractured in the glass below. The weight of everything he'd done, the arrogance, the dismissal, the years of believing he was untouchable, pressed against his chest until breathing felt like a confession. "I thought success would fix me," he muttered. Monica's voice was almost a whisper. "Success doesn't fix you. It only magnifies who you already are." She stepped closer, and for the first time all evening, Her tone carried quiet compassion. "I don't hate you, Lucas. I never did. You taught me something important, that sometimes losing someone is the only way to find yourself. So thank you." He looked up sharply, caught off guard by the sincerity in her voice. "Thank you?" "Yes," she said softly, "for breaking me early enough that I had time to rebuild right." The words hung between them, delicate and devastating. He studied her face, not for weakness, but for forgiveness. And it was there, but not the kind he wanted. It wasn't the forgiveness that invited return. It was the kind that signaled closure, a door gently, permanently closing, the kind that left him outside. Behind them, the ballroom doors opened briefly, spilling golden light and the murmur of admiration. Photographers were still milling about, capturing final shots of the night's most memorable guest. Someone gasped softly. They'd spotted the two of them on the balcony. Cameras lifted. Flashbulbs began to pop again. Lucas glanced toward them in alarm, but Monica didn't move. She stood with her head held high, her expression serene. He reached for words. Any words. But they came out broken. "Monica, please, if I could go back." She stopped him with a single raised hand. "Don't," she said simply. "You can't rewrite the chapter you abandoned. But you can start your next one. And maybe do it differently this time." The calm in her tone wasn't rehearsed. It was real. It was freedom speaking. For the first time in years, Lucas saw himself clearly, reflected not in her eyes, but in her absence from them. He had once believed she needed him to feel significant. Now he realized he had needed her to feel human. The cameras flashed again, and Monica turned slightly toward the crowd inside, the city lights painting her in gold. Her smile was soft, gracious, untouchable. "Good night, Lucas," she said. He tried to answer, but his voice wouldn't come. She stepped past him, walking back through the open doors, the sound of her heels measured, confident, final. As she entered the ballroom again, reporters swarmed, calling her name, their lenses turning fully toward her and away from the man standing in the shadows. The moment the doors closed behind her, the balcony fell silent. Lucas stood there, the city below him vast and indifferent, the laughter and applause inside fading into something distant. He'd wanted the world to see his triumph. Instead, it had witnessed his lesson. And as the cameras continued to flash, each one capturing the image of him standing alone against the night, the truth settled with devastating clarity. He had spent a decade building everything except the one thing that truly mattered: character. And just like that, Monica didn't win by fighting him. She won by outgrowing him. Because some victories aren't loud, they're lived. 6 months later, the city skyline shimmered beneath a rising dawn, and across the world, screens flickered to life. The Global Women in Business Summit was being broadcast live from Geneva, a gathering of the most powerful minds, innovators, and leaders redefining what success meant in a changing world. And at the center of it all stood Monica. The emerald gown had been replaced by a crisp white suit that radiated quiet power. Her hair was swept back, her posture regal, her presence effortless. The years of struggle had carved wisdom into her every word, and now the world leaned forward to listen. The Leighton Foundation banner glowed behind her, surrounded by partners from nations she had once only dreamed of reaching. Cameras clicked softly as she stepped up to the podium. In the front row sat Caleb and Karina, now 7. Small hands folded neatly in their laps, eyes bright with pride. They weren't just watching their mother succeed. They were watching her become a legacy. "Good morning," Monica began, her voice calm yet commanding. "When I first began my journey, I thought success was measured by numbers, income, influence, achievement. I thought value came from how much others believed in you." She paused, her gaze sweeping across the audience. Hundreds of women, men, and young leaders, each holding their breath. "But I learned," she continued, that the greatest kind of success isn't what the world gives you. It's what you build within yourself when the world gives you nothing. Soft applause rippled through the room. Cameras zoomed in, catching the steady glint of conviction in her eyes. "I started with nothing," she said simply. "A small apartment, a dream, and 2 children who became my reason to rise when I had every reason to fall. People told me I'd never make it without help, without a name, without him." She smiled faintly, not bitterly, but as if acknowledging an old story she'd long outgrown. "What they didn't understand," she said, "was that you don't need to be chosen by anyone to become extraordinary. You just have to choose yourself again and again until the world can't ignore what you've become." In the audience, a journalist leaned to her colleague. "That's Monica, the same woman from the Ward Global story, right?" Her colleague nodded. "Yes, the woman everyone thought was finished. Now she runs one of the largest philanthropic foundations in the world." The camera panned briefly to the twins, whose faces glowed with pride. Karina clutched the small pendant around her neck, a silver charm shaped like a phoenix, the foundation's symbol. Caleb's hands were folded tightly, as if holding on to the weight of his mother's words. Meanwhile, across the ocean, Lucas watched from his corner office in the glass tower of Ward Global. The same walls that once felt like his kingdom now felt like a cage. The television played silently, but he didn't need sound to understand what he was seeing. Monica's image filled the screen, her grace, her confidence, her presence. The headlines scrolled beneath her. "Monica Layton delivers keynote at Global Summit. The face of modern leadership. From rejection to revolution, the woman who redefined power." Lucas sat motionless, the city noise below muted against the pounding of his own heart. His reflection stared back at him from the window, a man who had once believed he'd reached the top, only to realize he had climbed the wrong mountain. He thought of the twins, their eyes, their smiles, the unmistakable echo of himself within them, and the unmistakable absence of him in their lives. He had wanted a legacy built on wealth and applause. She had built one on meaning and integrity. And now, as he watched her standing before the world, applauded, adored, unstoppable, he understood the price of his pride. He hadn't lost a woman. He had lost his mirror, the version of himself he could have been if he had chosen love over ego. Back on stage, Monica continued. "Power," she said, "isn't about standing above others. It's about standing so firmly in who you are that no one can pull you down. It's not built on domination. It's built on grace. And grace," she added softly, "isn't weakness. It's restraint. It's strength with gentleness, courage with compassion, and success without cruelty." The audience erupted in applause, but Monica's eyes flicked for a moment toward the camera at the back of the hall, as if she somehow knew who might be watching. Her voice lowered, intimate, personal. "True success," she said, "isn't about who has more. It's about who becomes more." The crowd rose to their feet, the thunder of applause filling the vast hall. Caleb and Karina stood too, clapping until their hands tingled, beaming from ear to ear. Their mother smiled down at them, the lights catching in her eyes. Because in them, in their pride, in their goodness, in their unshakable confidence, she saw her truest achievement. Everything she had built, everything she had fought for, every night she had cried, and every morning she had chosen to rise, it had all been for this. Not revenge, not recognition. Legacy. As the cameras panned across the audience, Lucas leaned back in his chair. For a long moment he couldn't move. The room around him felt empty, hollow, filled with the ghost of what he'd thought mattered. The applause echoed faintly through the speakers. He exhaled slowly, the sound of defeat soft, not angry, not bitter, just tired. He had built towers, but she had built meaning. He had collected titles, but she had created impact. He had wanted the world to bow to his name, but the world was now rising to hers. And somewhere, deep in the hollow of his chest, he finally whispered the truth he should have said years ago. I was wrong. No one heard it. No one needed to. The silence that followed said everything. Back in Geneva, Monica stepped away from the podium as the host thanked her, the applause still rumbling like distant thunder. Caleb ran up to her as soon as she left the stage, Karina right behind him. "Mom!" they exclaimed, wrapping their arms around her. "You were amazing," Karina said breathlessly. "Everyone was clapping so loud." Monica laughed, kneeling to pull them both close. "You know what makes me proudest?" she asked softly. They shook their heads. "That you know how to be kind, even when the world isn't. That you know how to stand tall, without stepping on anyone. That's the kind of success I want you to have." Caleb nodded solemnly. "Like you," Monica smiled. "Better than me." The host approached with a camera crew gesturing toward them. "Would you mind a quick photo for the press? A mother and her legacy?" Monica smiled, guiding the twins forward. Of course. They stood together beneath the summit's emblem, Rise Beyond. The flash went off, capturing not just a picture, but a story. The quiet triumph of a woman who turned heartbreak into heritage. He wanted to humiliate her, but she came with strength, grace, and two brilliant reflections of the truth he denied. She never needed him, because she became everything he wasn't. The camera lingers on Monica and her twins, framed by the glow of the world she built. And as the scene fades, her voice echoes softly over the closing shot. True success isn't about who has more, it's about who becomes more.